What's the matter?
The historical romance readathon is over. I don't know what to do with myself. What about my books about dukes?
How about a rock star romance?
What about my books about cricket?
How about a hockey romance?
What about my books about afternoon tea?
How about a cooking romance?
You're right. Maybe there is life after the historical romance readathon. Hi, my name's B.
Hey, what are you doing with that accent? You're from North Carolina. Settle down.
My name's B.
And welcome to my channel, Mama Needs to Read Romance. And remind myself that there's romance set in this time period. What an incredible month of reading. Let me know in the comments below, what was your favorite book for the month of August? I had so much fun. I tried new things. I went on adventures. I'm just talking about reading here, folks. A lot of it was thanks to the incredible historical romance readathon brought to us by Maggie of Maggie's Books and Stuff. Thank you again, Maggie, for including me. I had so much fun. I read 11 historical romances, 4 contemporary romances, 2 romantasy, which is romance plus fantasy, 1 YA fantasy, 1 alien romance, and 1 cozy mystery, for a total of 20 books. New to me authors included Emma Denny, Stephanie Garber, Beverly Jenkins, Eva Lee, Erica Ridley, Ellie Alexander, Kat Sebastian, Trisha O'Malley, Amelie Howard, Diana Quincy, and Hannah Bonham Young. That's 11 total. I've never read that many new to me authors in 1 month before. I read 4 5-star books, 6 4.5-star books, 5 4-star books, 3 3.5-star books, 3 2-star books, and 1 I DNF'd, which I will be discussing later. My first 5-star book was An Earl to Remember by Stacey Reid. This is book 2 of the Unforgettable Love series. This book was near perfection for me. Yes, I gave it 5 stars, but I would have given it 6, except at certain points it was a little too raunchy for me, a little too rough around the edges where I preferred a little more sweet, but this story was still just so good. Georgiana is a chef. She's trying to make it in the business, and she gets hired aboard a yacht where we meet our hero, who is also a serious rake. He has been with all the ladies and is ready to seduce Georgiana, but she's having none of it. A little spiciness happens, followed by a little fight. She's kicked off the yacht without the amount that they agreed to pay her for, and then later on, he is washed ashore with amnesia. He says that he remembers being very attracted to her. And so she can save face in front of the village. She says, "He's my husband. We're married." And no one is more surprised by that than Georgiana herself. But she figures she's going to have him to her home. She's going to have him work all around and basically pay off what he owed her for the time that she spent on his yacht. What she doesn't expect is that she would fall madly in love with him and he for her. I loved all these scenes. I loved it when he called her wife. I loved how sweet he was and willing to do all these chores around the house, and he became so endearing with the way that he treated her sisters. And of course there was some seriously spicy times too, because it is Stacey Reid after all. But I had so much fun with this book, which just came out, by the way, in August. So if you haven't had a chance to pick it up, do it, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. So in an effort to try all kinds of new things in the month of August, I thought it would be fun to try an age gap romance. I wanted to try a reverse age gap. This one I gave 5 stars, although the age gap had almost nothing to do with it. I was very pleasantly surprised. This was Her Night with the Duke, which is book 1 of the Clandestine Affairs series by Diana Quincy. I had never read Diana Quincy before. We have a woman who can really hold her own. She's half Arabic, which was really cool because you get to learn about her culture. You don't really see that in a lot of historical romances, so that was really a neat twist. She's good with a dagger. She's fiercely independent, but one night she ends up in an inn and these awful men are trying to accost her when someone tries to come to her rescue, but she needs no rescuing. Anyway, they have quite the evening together, and normally I don't care for one-night stands, but this was very powerful. Quickly thereafter, they discover that he's supposed to marry her stepdaughter. Yikes. Pretty crazy. I think I really do like forbidden romances. I think that might be my favorite trope. I just can't stop turning pages. And I loved our hero, don't get me wrong, but I think the thing that really stole the show was Leela. She was amazing, our heroine. This woman was strong and fierce, and in a different way than I've seen in a lot of historical romances where there's a strong heroine. She's often sort of mean, whereas Leela was not like this. She was always just so controlled. She was so just in charge, and everyone around around her was just learning that she was in charge. She uses all kinds of tools as weapons. She's got this beautiful, proud element to herself, not willing to adjust her standards. And I was just really, really impressed. I love this to the point where I'm definitely going to be reading more Diana Quincy. I'm going to be reading the next book in the Clandestine Affairs series this month. So I'm really looking forward to that. Oh my gosh, my next 5-star. I've already talked about this a bunch on my channel, so some of you have already heard about this, so I apologize if you have, but I have to talk about it again. This book is coming out in November. It's called Almost Like Being in Love by Soraya Wilson. I swooned so hard, I just about fell and hit the floor. It was so good. It's like Brigadoon with Gene Kelly back in the 50s. We have Marian and her best friend. They get stranded in a snowstorm in Scotland. All of a sudden, they're rescued by a Highlander who takes them to his Christmas village that's like hundreds of years old and travels through time. So now they're in this Scottish village for the rest of the holiday season, living it up, experiencing all the holidays as they were celebrated hundreds of years ago in Scotland. Really interesting stuff. And of course, Marian and Duncan start to fall for each other. He is the yummiest, yummy cinnamon roll. Like, delicious man. I loved him so much. I enjoyed this immensely. However, look at the trigger warnings in my description box. There were some sad parts, but I think it honestly made the story more epic. But yes, it was a little bit sad here and there, which is not necessarily what you want from a Christmas novella. But anyway, I just enjoyed it so much. So 5 stars. Okay, I'm repeating myself again, and I'm so sorry that I'm doing it, but this was another one I just mentioned in my top books of the summer, Gail's Family. It's another novella. It's book 3.5 of the Ice Home series, book 5,000,002 of the Ice Planet Barbarians series. Not really. But anyway, I fell in love with this so hard. We have Gail, who is in her 50s, and Vaza, who is, we don't really know how old he is, but he's older. They've both loved and lost. They've rebuilt together. They're just the most lovely pair. And I love how she actually winds up adopting an alien baby in need of a home and loving family. And seeing the three of them come together and make their own little family was just so beautiful. And I also, of course, loved seeing people of a certain age getting to flirt and have spicy times. I just thought it was so dear and how much they love each other and just how happy that Gail is. But again, check the trigger warnings in my description box because they deal with some heavy stuff. I love how Ruby Dixon said people were really excited about Gail and Vaza and wanted to see a full novella. And Ruby Dixon says, you know what? No, once you get to a certain age, you don't want to deal with all the drama. I just wanted to give them a nice novella that they could just enjoy. I thought that's so perfect. My first 4.5-star book is A Wicked Game by Kate Bateman, which is book 3 of the Ruthless Rival series. Like all of these books, we've got enemies to lovers, which is always a good time. This was such a fun plot. I wound up buying this book completely randomly because 1, the cover. I mean, come on. And then 2, the plot sounded so zany. This guy gets imprisoned on an island because of a bad map. It turns out the girl from the rival family is the one that made the map. However, there's more plot twists in this than you can shake a telescope at. What is that thing? Is that the telescope, right? I'm not nautical. It was really good. It was exciting. I loved seeing Morgan and Harriet fall for one another, despite the fact that they've been enemies since childhood. But honestly, everyone knows they've been into each other forever. But they've been denying it because Harriet and Morgan grew up together as children. They're sort of carrying on some of the things they did as kids where they have these bets. She says if he can come back from the war alive, she's going to give him 3 kisses. It gets pretty spicy. It was a lot of fun to read. I would have given this a perfect 5 stars, but some of the times Morgan was a little too wolfish when I needed him just to be a little bit sweeter. It was really good though, and a very satisfying ending. Gotta love this series. I also gave the next book in the series, Desert Island Duke, which is book 3.5 of the Ruthless Rival series. This book was slim. It was only 99 pages. I enjoyed it so much. It really felt like I was on an island. Caro and Max, who are longtime rivals, she thought he was just so shallow, but he actually had been acting out because he had feelings for her and really didn't know how to express it. I would have given this a full 5 stars because the island scenes were so fun, the flirting was so fun, the spice was so fun, but I didn't feel like I got to know enough about them as people, especially Max, before they were stranded on the island. But it has such a happy ending. I adored the ending. I can't say anything about it because I don't want to give anything away. It was just so much fun, such a blast. You don't have to read the rest of the series either. If you just want a nice novella, it's going to take you to a beach and you can have some fun. I can't recommend this highly enough. My next 4.5 star, you've probably heard me talk about already too. Oh my gosh, this one's coming out in November as well. It's called One Night in Hartswood by Emma Denny. This is her first novel. And this was my first historical romance. And man, was it terrific. We have two guys, Penn and Raph. Penn is supposed to get married. He doesn't want to. He feels so trapped. Then we have Raph, who also feels trapped for a different reason. But Raph and Penn meet one night in the woods and they have quite the spicy encounter, but neither of them realizes that Penn is supposed to marry Raph's sister. They take off together as friends, just trying to escape these confines that they feel and also trying to deny their attraction. Still not being aware of the identities of each other. I was on pins and needles waiting to see what would happen when they both discovered who the other one was. Oh my gosh. It was so good. It was deep. It's the perfect thing to read in the wintertime because the way Emma Denny describes all those winter settings, oh my gosh. It's coming out in November. I think it's going to be perfect for that time of year. I thought at first it was just going to be sort of not really spicy, but just emotionally deep. And then she surprised me. I feel like I needed the third act to be a little bit more epic than it was, but it was still very good and it was a very satisfying ending. And that is why I gave it 4.5 stars. My next 4.5 star was my first sapphic historical romance. This one was a buddy read as part of the historical romance readathon. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. The ensemble cast had me hooked from the beginning. They're adults, but they were orphaned together. This lovely man who they referred to as Bean brought them together and they became this beautiful found family, and they used their special skills to right wrongs and solve crimes. And it just sounds like the most fun. I was about halfway through this book and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to read this entire series. This looks so fun. This story primarily revolves around Philippa and Tommy. Tommy is one of the Wild Winchesters of the series. This is book 2, by the way, of the Wild Winchester series. Tommy has loved Philippa for a very long time, but Philippa isn't even aware of Tommy because Tommy is an expert at disguise. And Tommy has been around Philippa for at least a year in different disguises. At one point, Tommy disguises herself as an eligible bachelor seeking a bride who happens to be Philippa. The Winchesters have a special mission, and Philippa happens to be part of it at first. But once Philippa is aware that Tommy is interested in her, it sort of opens a whole new world for Philippa. It was a lot of fun to see them work together to solve the crimes. And again, like I said, this entire ensemble cast is extremely endearing, and it convinced me before I was even finished to read the entire series. My next 4.5 star is book 3 and the final book of the Forever Yours series by Cara Bastone. I thought this book was very different. It did a few things that I have not really seen in a romance book. One, our heroine was very firmly fine being single. She felt completely whole and did not have a problem. If she was never going to find a man ever, she was her own person. I loved that. 2, I was impressed with, at one point, it was very, very spicy, but they were both drunk and they decided to cuddle instead, which I thought was so cute. And 3, how can I say this? He was a little different down there. Anyway, I should talk about the story, right? Mary and John, they start out as enemies, basically. They're on a blind date. He says all the wrong things. She jumps to all the wrong conclusions. Even though their date didn't work out, John still feels sort of obligated to help her find a good guy. So he helps her weed out some bad apples. But as they start to spend time together as friends, they realize that there's actually something more going on. I really enjoyed this New York City setting. We got to see the cast that we've fallen in love with. I would have liked a little bit more in terms of happily ever afters for everybody in the cast, but it was still really good. John and Mary are both very likable characters, and I loved seeing them find forever in each other. I have heard so much about Hannah Bonham Young, and the other day I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try one of her books. And it happened that Next of Kin, which I gave 4.5 stars to, was available at the library just right away. And this is book number 1 of the next series. This found family book is fantastic. The characters are all so endearing. It felt so real. Chloe wants to adopt her little sister, and in order to make this foster care system gig work, she actually needs to be placed with another person, Warren, who is trying trying to adopt his brother, Luke. Chloe and Warren at first kind of butt heads because they both have their own agendas, which don't really include being with other people. They're just doing this because of forced proximity. But quickly they realize how incredible each of them is as a human, and they start to have one another's backs. It was so much fun to watch them become good friends and then something more. I loved seeing each of them stay true to themselves and take good care not only of each other, but of their siblings, and just seeing them sort of come together as a family, as this newfound family. It was so beautiful. I would have given it a full 5 stars, but I wasn't thrilled with some of Warren's behavior at the very end, although you do get the sense that he's learned and that he's changed for the better. So good job, Warren, and 4.5 stars. My first 4-star book is Honeymoon Crashers. This is book 1.5 of the Unhoneymooners series. It follows a couple years on the heels of the Unhoneymooners, which if you've read that was a great one. Honeymoon Crashers was only released as an audiobook, interestingly enough. I loved the narrators. I thought they did a super job, and I really enjoyed that Hawaii setting. I loved seeing Amy, whose life was upended in the first book, get her happily ever after. I did find our hero to be a little immature and just plain odd at times, but I really liked watching this couple work together to pull off the wedding of a lifetime in a very short period of time on a gorgeous island setting. I found Brody, our hero's backstory, to be a little bit heavy. It just felt a little out of place, but otherwise, I thought this book was a lot of fun, spicy, flirty, funny, a good Christina Lauren time. I gave 4 stars to Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is book 1 of the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I read this book thanks to Joanna of XO Joe, who recommended it to me. She's like my fantasy guru. The common thread I saw in this book is people wanting to be loved. It seemed to be the overall theme, which I thought was very powerful and something that a lot of people could relate to. I loved how Evangeline, our heroine, was willing to believe the best in people against all odds at some points. Jax, who is a demigod, works with her, and there's this question as to whether or not he has feelings or not. At first, Evangeline meets Jax because she is trying to stop her sister's wedding to the love of Evangeline's life. Suffice it to say that Evangeline is a strong heroine who encounters many interesting fantastical character and discovers that she might have some powers that she didn't know she had and be a very important part of unlocking a bigger story. There is a cliffhanger at the end, and I'm absolutely planning on reading more of the series, starting with Caraval, which is book 1 of the Caraval series, and intersects with this book. Thanks to Joanna, I was in a fantasy mood, and so when this randomly popped up the other day on NetGalley, I thought, ooh, it's an audiobook. I can listen to it quickly. I'll enjoy it. Wild Scottish Love. It is book 2 of the Enchanted Highlands series by Trisha O'Malley. She's written a lot. Everybody seems to love her stuff. It has fantastical elements that we're all familiar with, especially in the Scottish Highlands. There's water creatures and cute elves. There's that one farm animal that's like a ghost, and it's so cute and hilarious. Not all the characters are cute, but I will tell you the fantastical elements were really fun. Leah is a chef who needs a job, and Scotland comes calling, specifically a castle in the Scottish Highlands. They need a chef. They've been following her. They asked her to come out, although it turns out they might need her for more than just her cooking skills. And if that doesn't sound interesting enough, Monroe gets thrown into the picture, and Monroe is super yummy hero cinnamon roll. Oh my gosh, I loved it so much. I loved how they were falling for one another. And yes, there was spice. It was weird spice too at certain points because it was almost subliminal. Like they'd be walking along and all of a sudden one of them would think or say something and I was like, what? I actually had to rewind it a couple times. I'm like, did they just say what I thought they said? Like some spicy stuff just like thrown in there. So it was very different than what I'm used to. Different, but it was fun. We don't go too deep into any kind of peril or backstories or anything like that. It was more of a surface level. But again, that's not to say this wasn't fun. It was a great time, and I'm absolutely interested in reading this entire series and more from Trisha O'Malley in general. Okay, so remember when I said I wanted to try all different kinds of things? I really wanted to try a reverse age gap. And yes, Her Night with the Duke was wonderful, but it wasn't really age gappy. They were very close in age. So I was like, no, I need to try reverse age gap. I want to do that. So I did get that in this book I gave 4 stars to, Waiting for a Scot Like You by Eva Lee, the last book of the Union of the Rakes series. Now, I was a little nervous because the heroine is a widow. She's ready to live her best life, which apparently involves going going to, how can I say this to make my channel PG? A party, a wild party that lasts like a week. A lot of sleepovers, if you know what I mean, with a lot of people. Do you get what I'm saying? This is what she wants to do. So I was like, I don't know, I'm gonna like this. A lot of people recommended it. And I was like, well, all right, I'll just try it. If I don't like it, I can DNF it. She wants to have freedom. She's had 3 kids. She's like 46 years old. She's ready to just live her life while she still can. Enter Mr. Straight-laced, buttoned-up former soldier named Duncan, who is only 34. He and Beatrice cannot stand one another. She just wants to try everything. She wants to try Duncan. He's willing to try. But I tell you what, he falls first and he falls hard. So there's a lot of spice in this, and there's a lot of dirty talk as well, which I can only take so much of that. I found myself rolling my eyes to a certain point. I thought I was gonna get my eyes stuck in the top of my head, because it's like, all right, tell us again, Duncan, what do wicked lassies get? It's just like, okay. It's so funny. I went from that to literally crying by the end of this book because it became so emotionally deep. Oh, it was so good. And just really didn't know how it was going to end. I was very pleased. And I definitely want to try Evilly in the future. I'll see if she has more like a slightly sweeter side type book. This was a little edgier than I tend to go for, but I get through it. I'm so sorry. Anyway, my point is 4 stars, good book. A couple months ago, I randomly grabbed an arc that looked so fun. It was a cozy mystery. I've never done a cozy mystery arc before, but I was like, oh, this will be fun. Catch Me If You Candy by Ellie Alexander. This is book 17 of the Bookshop Mysteries, and I wound up giving it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I loved the fall scenes. Oh my gosh. It was so good. It starts on Halloween night, and then the fun carries into early November. The physical copy, it's got the recipes in the back of a lot of the foods, which was so much fun. As a romance reader, I enjoyed the sweet little romantic scenes between Jules and her husband, Carlos. And I really liked the entire ensemble cast. Now, as I said, this is book 17 in the series, and I've never read the series before, but I really felt like I was able to pick up pretty much right away who everybody was, what they were doing. Jules owns a bake shop, and on Halloween night, there's this big event in Ashland, which is in Oregon. Unfortunately, though, someone winds up dead, and Jules wants to get to the bottom of the crime. Everyone is a suspect, and I mentioned in my 3-minute review the other day that I had to sort of recalibrate my brain to look at characters as suspects and for things to be suspicious when she would say things like, I wonder what he meant by that, or could he have wanted to kill her because of that? I'm like, really? But I think that's probably fairly normal for cozy mysteries because you don't want to have like super heavy motives necessarily to kill someone. There's also a lot about dogs in this book because there is a Shakespeare play that's going to be happening that includes dogs. So a lot about the pampering dog world, dog casting, dog acting. It was very fun and funny. I am definitely planning on reading more Bake Shop mysteries in the future. Oh man, did I have a lot of heartburn about my rating for this book, Indigo by Beverly Jenkins. This was another buddy read that happened during the Historical Romance Readathon, and everybody that I knew and loved this book. And so I assumed I was going to love it, and then I didn't love it, and I was like, oh no. Because I do love Hester. Hester is our heroine, and she is one of the best heroines I've ever read. She is pragmatic. She's brave. She is just an incredible person. I loved her so much. I loved learning about the Underground Railroad. I loved reading a historical romance that was set in the 1800s in the United States. Beverly Jenkins is a beautiful writer. Much about this felt epic. I was boo-hooing at the end, in fact. I mean, it was such an incredible ending. I was also boo-hooing in the beginning, by the way. The beginning of the story reminded me of the first like 8 or so minutes of the movie Up by Disney, if you know that one. It was like all of the bad things happening. I actually read the prologue and then decided I wasn't going to read the book at all. I was like, this is way too heavy for me. No way. I actually went on Discord and I was asking the buddy readers, am I going to be able to make it through? Is this what it's going to be like? And they were like, you can do it. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. So anyway, I'm really glad that I did. However, I did not like Galen. I did not like our hero. I found him to be super controlling. He never listened to her. He was constantly putting himself first. Even at a certain point, he's like, yeah, all my friends are mad at me because of the way I'm treating you. Well, yeah, you're pushing yourself on her all the time. And then at one point, the thing that really got me was he used her innocence against her. He forced her hand so many times. Once they were together, it got better because he got his way. But I had a real issue with him. I loved how brave he was in terms of the Underground Railroad, but as a lover, he drove me crazy. And I just felt like Hester needed better. I'm in the minority here in terms of how I felt, but I just had to say it, because it really bothered me. I'm gonna bring up my DNF now, actually. I was reading Indigo at the same time I was reading Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune, reading about the Underground Railroad and Hester, who was always willing to go without for others, who was such a strong person, such a beautiful person, at the same time that I'm reading about a heroine who just wants to get high and cheat on her boyfriend. After I'd gotten about halfway through Meet Me at the Lake, I just realized, I'm like, I don't like these characters, any of them. I don't care about them. And I don't have any interest in seeing what happens. I also gave 3.5 stars to The Perfect Crimes of Marian Hayes by Cat Sebastian, the London Highwayman book 2. I read this book right after I read Indigo. And what's so interesting is I found myself thinking, I wish we could take our hero from this book and put him with Hester, which would make no sense. I found Rob, our hero, to be the best cinnamon roll character. Oh my gosh, I loved him so much. And Marian was not my favorite. She was sort of a tough nut to crack. I liked how honest she was about her feelings, but Rob is willing to love her no matter what. This was considered a cozy historical romance. This was also a queer historical romance. Both of our characters are bisexual, and it's interesting. I've read other books where one of the characters was bisexual, and it's usually just sort of an aside, like part of their backstory. But it was really interesting to see how a person who identifies as a man and a person who identifies as a woman, who both identify as bisexual, could get together, and then you still see the elements of that in the way that they love each other. It was really fascinating. It was very refreshing. I was impressed. Rob actually starts writing letters to Marian because he is trying to get her to pay him to not tell her secrets. She winds up actually shooting someone, and then they're sort of on the run together. You can see that they already have chemistry in their letters, which were extremely entertaining at the beginning of the book. It was a little bit slow at points, but I think that's why they call it cozy. It was a very entertaining read, which is why I gave it 3.5 stars. I also gave 3.5 stars to Never Met a Duke Like You by Amelie Howard. This book is coming out in November, and it is book 2 of the Taming of the Dukes series. This book was billed as Bridgerton meets Clueless, and I loved the movie Clueless, so I was excited about it. Ironically, Clueless is based on the book Emma by Jane Austen. We have a hero and a heroine who were childhood sweethearts, but now, after some forced proximity in an attic, the chemistry is definitely there. And they are fighting it with everything they've got. Mainly because he really hates her guts and he thinks she's a terrible person, and she's perfectly content for him to feel that way. And it didn't really make sense to me, honestly. It felt a little shallow. I was very entertained by much of this book, don't get me wrong. Vesper is our Cher from Clueless. She is a do-gooder. And then there's Aspen. He's got a pretty heavy backstory, and he's trying to work through that. Vesper also, she has some things going on, such as ADHD, and it was interesting to see that brought up in a historical romance. Once the two of them get together, the chemistry is white hot. The spicy times were very spicy. I didn't love some of this book because it just didn't feel like it made sense that he was going to hate her as much as he did, and for her to keep certain things from him, I didn't really understand the why behind it. I thought the darker elements honestly weighed down some of the lighter. The ending was very satisfying though, and I think I'd like to read some more Amelie Howard. I gave 3 stars to A Matter of Temptation by Stacey Reed. This is book 1 of the Unforgettable Love series. I am in the minority here though, so take what I say with a grain of salt. I feel like maybe I somehow didn't experience this book the right way. I think part of my problem was I read this right after reading a ton of Tessa Dare, which is of course filled with sweet humor and fun, and this book was certainly more steamy, spicy, and serious. So I will tell you, I really didn't like the narrator. Every time the narrator spoke as our hero, this was kind of the affect, blowing on his fingernails and rubbing him on his shirt while he was just talking, like no matter what he was talking about, he could have been like, oh, I can't wait to be with you. You're amazing. Oh, I love you so much. I really tried not to let that impact my experience of the story, but I'm wondering now if it did, because so many people that I loved this book. Our heroine can fight with a sword, which I loved, but I feel like the magic of her dueling against our hero fizzles out pretty quickly. He is very cerebral, aloof. Mina even refers to Simon, our hero, as mercurial, which is definitely a red flag for me. I really dislike that in my heroes. I also was treated to many a speech about Parliament. It was funny at one point, she's trying to tell him how she feels, and she talks about how she didn't really have time to give him a speech about love. And I'm like, well, how could you have time to give him a speech about love? We have 6 more speeches about Parliament to give in this book. So, what? Editor B coming at you from the future. Actually, well, I guess this is the past by the time you're watching this. But I was editing this video and realizing I was so busy complaining and explaining why I didn't love this as much as just about everyone else. I forgot to tell you why this book is good and what the plot is. Mina is trying to defend her brother's honor after realizing they are in dire straits financially, and she decides to take his place and dress as a man to fence Simon. Well, that first scene is so exhilarating and kicks off a story that for me had highs and lows. Simon, against his better judgment, decides to hire Mina as his secretary. This reminded me of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I love how she helped him grow as a person and experience true love for the first time. As always, Stacey Reid knows how to write a spicy scene and give us a great ending. My last book, my other 3-star, is The Governess Gambit by Erica Ridley, book 0.5 of the Wild Winchester series. I was so into the Wild Winchesters after having read The Perks of Loving a Wallflower. I'm so glad that I didn't read this first, because if I'd never experienced Erica Ridley and not seen how fun later on in the series would be, I don't know that I would have any interest in reading this later. I liked the plot. I loved that we were helping orphans, which was lovely. And I loved, again, the idea that we have these adult orphans who are working together to right wrongs and solve crimes using their skills, but the element of fun just wasn't there like it was in The Perks of Loving a Wallflower. There wasn't really any romance to speak of. It's hinted at as something that's going to happen in the first real novel of the series. But a lot of this is sad because it talks about poor treatment of children in this orphanage and this children's school. And especially Bean, the man who brought them all together, is very ill and dying for most of this novella. If you've read any of the series, you know that he does pass away, which was a sad way to start a series. I am really looking forward to the book that it's definitely leading right into, which is The Duke Heist, which I'm planning on enjoying in the month of September. Well, those were my books. I had so much fun, and I hope you had a great reading month too, and I hope you're enjoying your reading right now as well. That's it for me. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're enjoying whatever it is that you're reading. Until next time, thanks so much. Take care. Bye.